right, well, can we get your attention, please? First of all, let me welcome you all to our dinner at the Square, the final dinner at the Square this season. I want to take a second to introduce myself. I'm Jack Seiler, Mayor of the City of Fort Lauderdale, and I am honored and privileged, and I'll repeat that, honored and privileged to co-chair this with County Commissioner Chip Lamarck, a gentleman that has been incredible to work with, incredible to share the podium with at various times throughout this year and in prior years with the dinner at the Square, and just an all-around good guy. And I won't, I'm going to say that in front of his wife because Eileen hasn't heard that too much, but not enough in Broward County. But you know what? He's just a great guy. Let me take a second, and for those of you who've been with us before, you know that this is the one time we ask you now to pull out your cell phones. Probably haven't heard that, Jeremy, in a long time, but pull out your cell phones. And if you're on social media, we ask you now to post, tweet, or share the information about this Village Square event. Part of this concept is that we get great speakers, we get great discussion, great debate, but we also want to share that. We want to help educate the rest of the people that aren't here with us tonight. So it's the hashtags are hashtag Village Square and hashtag Broward College. For those of you who are new here tonight, we provide a safe and comfortable forum for civic engagement on matters of local, state, and national importance. At the Village Square, you're going to hear viewpoints from both those who favor and those who oppose an issue. It's important for people to see that individuals with opposing views or different positions and different backgrounds and socioeconomic backgrounds can all come together and have what we call an elevated conversation about the issues. You might be wondering, well, how does that differ from last year's presidential election? I can run through the ways. But we do this through our Dinner at the Square and our Takeout Tuesday series. The event tonight is what we call the Dinner at the Square, and it is a signature Village Square event. The debate will be spirited, but I believe it'll be fact-based, and I believe it'll be civil. And you have dinner while you're going through that spirited, fact-based debate, so it's kind of fun. Our Takeout Tuesday series are free and open to the public as we try to make the Village Square accessible and affordable to all. So for your Takeout Tuesday, you bring your favorite takeout dinner, you grab a drink, and join us to learn about a hot local topic facing our community. I want to take a second to tell you that hosting these events would not be possible without the leadership of a gentleman that I've had the good fortune of knowing probably going on almost 2 decades now that I'm thinking about it. And I like to just tell you that he is a community builder. Some people call him a college president. Some people call him the great leader of Broward College. I call him a community builder because what he does goes so far beyond the boundaries of that college, goes so far beyond the boundaries of education. He's building community here in Broward County, here in South Florida, and he's a remarkable gentleman. I want to introduce President David Armstrong. David, thank you. Also want to take a second and thank our Village Square members. This doesn't happen without the members that sponsor every single year, Step Up. So if you are a Village Square member, please just stand or wave and let us give you a quick round of applause. Thank you. For those that are interested in being members, we have we also, in addition to members, we have an advisory board. But membership starts at $68 and supports the mission and programming of Village Square for the whole year. The members get to attend a pre-dinner cocktail reception with the speakers prior to the Dinner at the Square event, as we were all just next door for that. If you're interested in becoming a member, you may refer to the information in your program and sign up at the door. Also want to thank tonight the official partners, I should say, the Greater Fort Lauderdale Alliance, the Broward College Center for Civic Engagement and Leadership, and the Broward League of Cities. If we could have a round of applause for them. And at this point, I'm going to ask Commissioner Lamarck to step up and kind of give you the ground rules of engagement. And again, for our guests from out of town, we've got some very interesting ground rules of engagement, but I think you're going to enjoy them because we believe that good people can get together, disagree, debate, and let's all try to elevate everybody's information, education, and knowledge about an issue. So, Chip, I'll turn it over to you for that purpose.
Thank you, Jack. about a round of applause for our mayor? So before I give you the ground rules, I'd like to ask, who here is a Broward College student or an alum? That's a good showing. Well, so am I. So at some point, I'm going to be looking for one of you to take my place at what I'm doing, and Jack as well. So I want to thank you and welcome you tonight. Tonight is our final dinner at the Square, and the reason Square of the season, and we delve into another heated topic: what is the government's role in fighting poverty? Before we begin, we want to make sure you have some announcements and tell you about the ground rules. Tonight we are talking about a topic that we don't necessarily all agree on, but to keep the conversation civil and informative, I'd like to caution you against what we call team clapping. When you clap with your side says something you agree with, maybe give a little groan if you disagree. Again, the mayor mentioned this is different than the presidential elections. We'd like you to do neither. Tonight, we'd like you to challenge yourselves to work hard and listen to both sides of the story. Just in case you need a reminder, we have our civility bell, which is in the hands of the capable Adriana Fasano-Ficano. So, Chief of Staff at Broward College, we've asked her to be particularly sensitive to either side of the aisle and ring the bell if she hears demonizing. Adriana, please ring the bell to give everyone an idea. All right. Thank you. A portion of the evening will be question and answer, and there is a podium at the back of the room with a mic, and we'd like you to ask a question. Please be conscious of your time when asking questions and get in as many questions as possible. Notice I put a little emphasis on the word questions. We're not looking for your opinion. We're looking for your question so we can form one together. So I'd appreciate it if you ask questions and not give us a speech. Lastly, I have the pleasure of welcoming our guests and our panelists, the moderator for this evening. Please help me in welcoming our panelists. We have Mark Wilson, the president and CEO of the Florida Chamber of Commerce. If you haven't taken a good look at, Mark is going to probably talk about it, but some of the great things the Chamber is doing. We are a proud Six Pillars County here in Broward County, and that would not be possible without the Florida Chamber and the Florida Chamber Foundation. Mark is the president and CEO of the Florida Chamber. So now we also have Jeremy Greer, the Vice President of Policy and Research for CFED. We have Maria Hernandez, the Vice President of Program Operations for the United Way of Broward County. So if you'd all come on up here. Our moderator for this evening is none other than Sue Gallagher, the Chief Innovation Officer for the Children's Services Council of Broward County. And that the hollering in the back of the room, that would be Cindy Aaron Briggs-Seltzer from Children's Services Council. I do want to say that Broward was challenged, and we reauthorized and resupport our Children's Services Council for the great services that you deliver to our children. We're extremely fortunate to have them here this evening and encourage you to read their bios in the program book, as they are incredible individuals. Now on to our program, and again, thank you for your support. We hope you enjoy the evening, and I want to just a special thank you to Mark Wilson for making this happen via Skype technology. So if you would.
And round of applause for Mayor Seiler and Commissioner LaMarca. Thank you very much. So good evening. How's everybody doing? Great salad, right? Yeah. Okay, and here comes dinner. All right. So I'm going to just provide a little bit of context for this evening's discussion, and then we'll roll right into some questions for our distinguished panelists. Mark, I just want to make sure that you can hear us. Give us a wave.
I can, thank you.
Oh, and we can hear you. Great. Wonderful. All right. So actually, part of the context that I'm going to provide for you this evening comes from the Florida Chamber of Commerce study called Less Poverty, More Prosperity, Florida's Fiscal Cliffs Report. And what that report tells us is that in Florida today, over 3 million people live in poverty. 1 in 6 of us. So 1 in 6 people at this table potentially could live in poverty in the state of Florida. And that poverty disproportionately affects children as well. Nearly 1 million children under the age of 18 live in poverty here in Florida. So that's 26% of children under the age of 5 live in poverty. A little over 1/4 of the children live in poverty. And here in Broward County, we did some statistics when we did our youth summit in February, and we had the discouraging news that 1 in 5 children in Broward County lives in poverty. 20% of our children live in poverty here in Broward. And so despite low unemployment and despite jobs, we're still faced with this intractable issue of poverty here locally. Some things about poverty that might be helpful for you to have a context for this discussion is sometimes poverty is situational. If you have a foreclosure on your house, if you lose a job, if you have a medical condition, that's situational poverty, right? It comes up, it happens due to crisis in your life. And then there's also generational poverty, where people are born into ongoing cycles of poverty. And so being able to understand what are we doing for people in situational poverty versus generational poverty, I think is something that we will draw out in this evening's conversation. Another important factor about poverty is that it's not just an individual or an individual family experience. Some new data talks about how there are communities where the increase of poverty has happened from 2000 to 2012. And what that looks like is 20 to 40% of folks living in poverty has grown now to 49%. So we're getting these concentrated pockets of poverty that are in neighborhoods and in communities, which adds a double burden to people living in those neighborhoods, because not only are you poor, but everyone in your circle of support is poor. And so those are some community dynamics that I think are important to understand when we frame this dialogue around what are some of the solutions and what might be the role of government. In addition, some studies coming out of Harvard talk about that the #1 reason for the lack of upward mobility, intergenerational mobility, is racial residential segregation. And Broward County has one of the highest rates of racial residential segregation in the nation. And so we want to be thinking about what role does race play and the history of some of those conditions in our community. You know, I went to look at, so what are the causes of poverty? And we'll talk a little bit about some government policies and some historical conditions. But when I looked at the research, the updated message about poverty is that it's not about single-family homes, but that it's really about income inequality. That while the GDP appears to have grown, that the average 99%er's wage has not grown. And so there's something about income inequality that is perpetuating this poverty that we're seeing in our community. Amartya Sen is a Nobel Peace Prize economist. And he talks about poverty not just as an economic issue, but also as a social issue. And so one of the things that he says is poverty is not just the absence of income, but poverty is the presence of powerlessness, voicelessness, and social exclusion. So I think one of the things I hope we consider tonight is not just the economic realities of poverty, but also the social realities of poverty and what are some of the solutions to begin to address that. So in forums such as this, and we've had the pleasure and the honor of participating in many Broward School children debate teams who have this same principle of how do we have civil dialogue, how do we bring opposing viewpoints together. And my experience of these types of civic dialogues and debating experience is that it's exciting to listen to divergent viewpoints and to learn from each of those viewpoints, to then weave together innovative solutions and approaches and opportunities from the best ideas in those divergent ideas. So being the Chief Innovation Officer, I'm looking for those intersectional nuggets that I can take from those divergent places to create well-being in our community. So I invite you this evening to listen for those nuggets in those divergent viewpoints and what are some of those possibilities and opportunities that we can embody here in our community. And so with that, I'd like to take a moment to have our distinguished panelists introduce themselves and give a 1-minute preview of their thoughts on government's role in fighting poverty. So Mark, I'm going to start with you. If you'll tell us your name. We know you're from the Florida Chamber of Commerce, and just give us a teaser on your views on government his role in fighting poverty.
Sure, of course I will. And I appreciate the invitation. I so wish that I could be there with you. And I know the technology will be a little strange in the beginning, but I'm sure we'll all get used to it. Sue, I also want to especially thank David Armstrong and Mayor Seiler, two good friends. And I think we're all really in this together. And again, I wish I was there with my fellow panelists. So as president of the Florida Chamber of Commerce, you're all probably wondering, what is the Chamber of Commerce talking about poverty for? And when I testified in front of Congress, when we go around Florida, that's the biggest reaction that we get. And look, here's the deal. We have 20 million people in Florida, and we're going to add 6 million more people by 2030. We need to create 2 million more jobs. It is impossible to create prosperity for 26 million Floridians unless our government policies and all of our approach has a goal in mind of creating economic opportunity and good jobs for everyone. And so when you look at the research, when you look at the FloridaHistoricCard.org, and you realize that there's over 3 million Floridians that are living in poverty, my case statement to you tonight would be this. If they were born into poverty, it's not their fault. They don't know anything different. And so what all of us need to do, we need to not see this as a partisan issue of the right versus the left. We need to see this as an issue about some people want to create the same economic outcomes for everyone. But we at the Florida Chamber believe we should create government policies that create economic opportunity for everyone, regardless of race or zip code. And so that's what you're going to hear from the Florida Chamber tonight, and I'm excited to be part of the panel. I appreciate it.
Great. Thank you very much. Maria?
Hi, good evening. Maria Hernandez, and I'm the Vice President of Program Operations for United Way of Broward County. Basically, what I do is that I oversee everything that has to do with community investment. We do community assessment to identify gaps, areas where we can really make a change in the community. And we invest those dollars. We do this in collaboration. We have about 74 nonprofit agencies in this county. I do believe the government plays an important role in fighting poverty. I believe that the government needs to create the policies that can support infrastructure to make sure that we create safety net, not only for those identified as poor by the government definition, but also for the working poor, the at-least population, those that are working hard every day, they still cannot meet their needs.
Great, thank you very much. Jeremy?
Thanks, and I'm going to trust that Mark isn't going to make any faces behind me while I'm talking. Did that violate a ground rule? Okay. Okay. All right, so I'm Jeremy Graham. I'm the Vice President for Policy and Research with the Corporation for Enterprise Development. And what we, okay, can you hear me? Good. So what we do is our real vision is an America in which all families can reach prosperity. So there's your first nugget, I think, between us and Mark, is that we really think that it's create an opportunity for all households to achieve financial stability so that they're not living paycheck to paycheck, day to day, week to week, and that they can actually build wealth. Because what we believe is that wealth is the thing that is a catalyst to move up the economic ladder so that you're not kind of stuck in the same place year after year. And we think that the government has a huge role to play in making those types of investments so that all families can achieve that. So that's my little preview.
Excellent, thank you. All right, so you guys ready? Here we go. All right, so I want the panelists to talk about some of the historical conditions and or the government policies that have led to the poverty that we're seeing in our state and in our community. So I'll take a volunteer first, and then I'll choose.
Sure.
Jeremy, thank you.
So I'm going to start at the most controversial places, and that is with race. And we have a long history as a country of investing in the wealth building and the economic prosperity of our people. We have a long history of this, going as far back as the Homestead Act, where we gave land away to Americans that they could use and then build wealth and move ahead. To the GI Bill, as people came back from fighting overseas for our country, we gave them home ownership opportunities to go to college. And then later, around home ownership, with the creation of the FHA, the Federal Housing Agency, to create opportunities for people to buy homes and really invest in their communities. The problem is that those opportunities have not been made available to all of our citizens. For example, the GI Bill, many of the African American GIs, Hispanic GIs, Native American GIs came back and found a housing market in which they couldn't buy into. So while the GI Bill was there, they didn't have an opportunity to reap those benefits because they couldn't purchase homes in those same communities, largely because of discrimination. So a lot of what we are dealing with today, that racial segregation that we're talking about, is actually the product of policies that were made in the past and practices that happened in the past. And I'm not talking about the distant past. I'm talking about it, 1970, 1980. We just had an event in Washington with the fair housing, person who's in charge of fair housing at HUD, and they're still bringing red line cases today against financial institutions. So we really, in order to get at this and figure out how we can create opportunity for all, we really need to start thinking about how we address the racial disparities in communities.
Great, thank you. Maria?
Yes, I think everything starts with early care and education. In the last 10 years, we haven't seen much and not a lot of investment in early care and education. Our families, they cannot afford to send their children to high-quality child care. And that's the beginning of everything. So we need more policies in that area. Definitely, there's a cutback in health, education, and vital human services programs that are needed by our community. When we look about, wages, what our families are making, a great percentage of renters are Latinos and African American. 50% of their income goes to pay for their housing. What does that mean for the community? What does that mean for the government and those that are making the law? So definitely there should be some attention to that. Housing is, I think, one of the #1 issues as well.
Thank you very much. Mark?
Yeah, thank you. And here's what must be interesting to the audience is I know the audience is probably looking for points of difference or distinction or arguments, but I think it's possible and plausible that each of our points would be true and not necessarily conflicting. So my viewpoint of the question is, the historical perspective. I think if you look at government policies relative to poverty and welfare and assistance, I think that somewhere around 90% of all of the energy goes into what can we do to help people who are in poverty right now. We have about 80 federal programs and $1 trillion, rough numbers, in poverty-type programs. And the reason I use the 90% number there is our vantage point at the Florida Chamber is there's not nearly enough discussion about how to change policies over a generation so that government policies actually encourage people to be in a different situation over a generation. I think Jeremy actually made a fantastic point about having opportunity like the GI Bill, and that opportunity wasn't available to enough people across a broad enough spectrum. Well, what would happen if we took the systems relative to poverty? For example, in this country, our policy is when you make a little bit more money, you lose your benefit. So you might lose your food stamp, or you might lose your transportation stipend, or you might lose your free and reduced lunch at school. So all of a sudden, 75 cents more per hour that you've earned, all of a sudden means you're worse off because you're better trained and have a better job. So our vantage point at the Florida Chamber is historically, yes, Jeremy's right. We've had unequal opportunity for everyone, and we're on the same page that that's a problem. But going forward, how can we better align government policies so that we get the outcomes that we actually want? We want people to want to work. We don't want people to bump up against the ceiling where we're taking their benefits away just because they've earned more. That's insanity, and we have to stop it.
Thank you. Other panelists, would you like to respond to anything that's been said?
Definitely, I agree with that. But I think, we need to start also with the definition of poverty. In 1959, poverty was defined as, an individual making $11,000 a year. How many of you can live on that income right now? Well, that haven't changed in all these years. That haven't changed. And when the government defines poverty, they're looking at income, economical status, and that's not poverty. At least that's not how I define it. Poverty is multidimensional. You're looking at education. That's where everything starts. You're looking at housing. You're looking at, transportation. You're looking at the community around you. It would be interesting, for all of you here, if you think for 1 minute, how many in your family of people that you know have been impacted by substance abuse or mental health? So today I can have a job and I can be doing well. Tomorrow, if one of my children is in a mental health situation, has a mental health situation, or is involved in drugs and alcohol, I can lose everything I have because it costs $28,000 for 30 days of treatment. So when you're looking at poverty, it's multidimensional. You need to be looking at the full picture of what it takes to be stable.
Yeah,
Excellent.
thank you.
you.
One thing I'd like to add to that is, so CFPD, we've done some research looking at what we think is really a definition of financial stability, when a family actually has achieved financial stability. And for us, what we said is, so does a family have 3 months of liquid savings that they can access, they can get to in a crisis? Do they have 3 months? And does that, and having that savings, will that keep them above the poverty line if they were to lose their primary source of income? And what we found is that across the country, about 43% of the country does not meet that standard, and what we would call liquid asset poor. In Florida, that number is about 48%. So almost half of the citizens in Florida would fall into financial crisis if they lose their primary source of income because they don't have 3 months of savings. And for us, when we think about poverty, that's what we think about. We think about our people at a place where they have stability and that they're not worried day to day, month to month, if I lose my job, if my kids get sick, if I have to take care of an elderly parent, will I fall into financial crisis? That's really the standard we should be thinking about, and not like where the federal government pegs the poverty line.
Right, so redefining really what is poverty is an important community conversation to ensure that we're targeting the right policies. Mark, did you want to add to that definition of poverty?
No, I don't disagree with it, but I think it's important that we at least honor the fact that we're having a conversation about this tonight, but I would say 95% of the voters in Florida have absolutely no idea that 1 in 6 of us are in poverty. And I don't want to downplay or cheapen the value of how important awareness is. I feel that the business community often wants to help solve this, but only after they know it's a problem in the first place. So I think whatever definition we choose, of course it's more than dollars. And of course it's more than situational poverty. I think it's important that we all continue to make sure that awareness is out there. And programs like tonight go a long, long way, because when people say, wait, that number can't be right, as soon as they learn that it is, their heart starts to take over and they want to know what can we do to help. So that's all I'd add.
Excellent, thank you. So in Broward County, over 50% of the jobs pay less than the median household income, right? So over 50% of our folks are working hard, and yet they don't even hit the median household income. And so how would you address this condition to reduce poverty?
So like I mentioned before, definitely I think in Broward County we need to pay close attention to the quality of education, early care and education for children. We need to start somewhere. We got to break the cycle, the generational cycle, making sure that we sending more children to college, and they cannot get to college if they don't go, if they are not equipped to get there. So definitely early care and education is a way. We need to start advocating for affordable health insurance. And access to health is, in many occasions, more than just having health insurance. When a woman has to pay $750 a deductible to get a mammogram, that's completely unacceptable, and that's in Broward County. So those are the issues we need to start addressing and creating awareness about those things. We need additional fundings for the schools. You know, how can the children have the high quality education and have the attention from the teacher when a teacher has 30 children in the classroom? I had 2, and sometimes it's hard for me to pay attention to the 2 of them. So imagine when you have 30 in a classroom. It's raising awareness here in Broward County, but also prioritizing. And prioritizing means, you know, looking at behavioral health, looking at education, which is the key for this family to break the cycle of poverty, looking at access to health care. Health care is a human right. And if you don't take care of them now, you're going to take care of them later in the emergency room.
Thank you. Jermaine?
I mean, I think that speaks to kind of the definition of what government's there to do, right? That's a market failure, right? People are not making enough money, even if they're working full time. Many of them probably well over the 40 hours a week, and still can't make ends meet. And I know there's a lot of programs that we have to subsidize that. To subsidize those families, and many of them aren't funded well enough, and we know that. I think the struggle that I have is the constant conversation is that, well, we don't have enough money. We don't have enough money to take care of everyone that needs to be taken care of. And I beg to differ. I think it's a question of priorities. And here's an example. So through our federal tax code, we spend through our federal tax code, through tax benefits that go out to American families, about $700 billion a year to subsidize the wealth and asset building of American households, right? That's $700 billion. That is more than the combined budgets of 14 cabinet level agencies. Every cabinet level agency other than the Department of Defense, just spent through the tax code. Now, I don't have a strong opinion about how that's right or wrong that we're subsidizing. I actually think it's good that we're subsidizing the wealth building of families. The problem I have is that the top 1% of taxpayers get more of that $700 billion than the bottom 80% of taxpayers combined. That tells me we have a priority mismatch, that we're not investing in the people that need it the most. Now, I don't have a problem with people getting tax benefits at the high end. What I have a problem with is when it's at the expense of working families that are working hard every day at the bottom. That's where I have a problem. And I think that there's a way that we can, through our tax code, or beefing up the spending and the investment in families, that we can do that and still do it in a way that keeps us in a revenue neutral place where we're not spending more federal dollars than we were before. It's really a question of prioritization.
Thank you. Mark?
Yeah, so that's kind of fascinating. This is probably where we all have a pretty big disagreement at this point in time. I think the words weren't said, but the conversation that the government should take from one of you in the room and give to somebody else is, frankly, just doesn't make sense from an economic standpoint. I think we have to go back to the prior question about where we talked about situational poverty and generational poverty. Believe it or not, if Jeremy lost his job today, I actually don't want him to lose his home or his car or his savings. I'd like to think that all of us in America would want to pay taxes to be able to provide a safety net for Jeremy to get back on his feet, to get the training he needs at Broward College or wherever it might be. but it's predicated on Jeremy would want to get back into the workforce, and I assume he does, and I would want to help him with that. But a lot of the question is really about generational poverty, right? The 3 million people in Florida that are born, if you will, into generational poverty. I think what we have to start looking at is, and I'll give you an example. When I testified in Congress, I was using an example out of Pennsylvania only because that's what the Congressional Budget Office uses. If you take a single mom who earns $29,000 a year with 2 kids, right? So she's in poverty, $29,000. And in order for her to be better off, she has to make $69,000 compared to all of the government benefits that sort of shackle her into staying in the position she's in. So I'm saying all that to say this. Wouldn't it be a better policy that if that mom wants to continue to get training at Broward College, or if that mom wants to continue to put her kids through school and continue to better herself, wouldn't it make sense that we all want to continue for her to get the benefits, the transportation benefits or healthcare benefits that we're talking about tonight, with the idea that when she gets to $69,000 of income, in the example I'm using, then we're not going to pay for those things anymore. But I think what would happen is over a generation, all of us could realize, look, this is not a forever thing. Poverty is short term, and we want to end the cycle of generational poverty. It starts with early learning, and it goes all the way right through smarter policies. So we're all in with the idea that it's going to take a lot of dollars and a lot of investments to break this cycle. But to think that we can have more government programs where I'm going to take more from the people who are in the room and give it to people who don't, that's just going to create more programs and more government. It's not going to actually end poverty and create economic prosperity for more people. So that's probably the first place we might have a disagreement tonight.
Do you want to respond, Jeremy or Maria?
Yeah, I'd respond. I know we're going to talk about housing later. So, I would like to see housing subsidies for housing, go to people that are having trouble paying their mortgage or their rent. That's where I would think it makes sense for the government to provide those subsidies. But those subsidies are bound. They're capped. They're budgeted, right? They're Section 8. They're FHA. They're all programs that are capped and budgeted. Opposed to another form of housing subsidy, which I know this may be controversial in the room with some folks, because I'm sure some people get this subsidy, the mortgage interest deduction, which largely goes to people that I would argue, many of them, probably don't have problems paying their mortgage or their second mortgage every month. So my thing about when we're talking about prioritization, let's prioritize where we put our public investments, our precious public investments there to support people who are having trouble because of market failures, because they live in a housing region that has high-cost housing, and it's hard for them to make an income to pay their housing. Let's focus our investments in those places and help those folks, because if they have more stability, I would argue that that's good for the economy. That means they have more discretionary income that they can put back into the economy. That means they're having less instability that is becoming a cost on the government. So I would say let's focus our investments in those places.
Good. Thank you. Maria?
Yeah, and I would like to add, I definitely agree that changing the eligibility criteria for government programs is critical. Somebody that's making 5 cents more a week later may not qualify to get child care, so definitely. But one thing, that I want to mention is, let's say let's use the same sample that we just mentioned about that woman that's working. And eventually we're hoping she's going to be making $69,000. Well, she may never make $69,000 because she may have a mental health condition. She may have a child with special need that she needs to stay home and take care of. So she may not make this, maybe she's never going to make the $69,000 a year. So still, as the government has a responsibility to support her so that she can earn a decent living, that she can give her kids a home, and that she can feed her children and send them to school. So still, that's there. No, everybody's going to go to college. Not everybody's going to graduate from college. Yes, I agree we need to create more programs and technical programs, but the reality is not everybody is going to do it. So for those that cannot do it because they have a mental health condition, because they have a substance abuse situation, because they have another illness, what do you do with those?
Good. Thank you. Mark, any response or go on to the next question?
Well, I think at the end of the day, of course, I think all of us would agree that if they're interested in working and training and learning, no matter what their situation is, special needs, 10 kids, no kids, married, not married, no matter what their situation is, everybody deserves access to opportunity. And suppose in the example that was just given that mom never makes it to $69,000. What would be wrong with continuing the policy where if she wants to work, let's say she only makes $43,000, is the most she ever makes in her life. Go all the way back to my example, when she made $12 an hour, why does she start losing food stamp benefits when she goes to $13 an hour? So why would it be such a bad policy? Instead of having these cliffs where once you make $13 an hour or $18 an hour, you lose these benefits, what would be wrong with a government policy that said, look, we're going to provide bridges to these people. And if for some reason they're permanently working but permanently stuck at $43,000, why would you want to take their benefits away? I think the other side of that, though, we may not have time to get into tonight, is I hope that when we say we're going to provide government housing, that we would all agree that at some level, when someone has enough education or enough on-the-job training and they start earning more, at some level they should work their way out of forever being in government housing. I think that's another definition of poverty, and I don't think that's what we're saying. I just want to be clear about that.
Thank you, Jerry.
Yeah, so I want to make a point of agreement around the silliness of basically punishing people that are in poverty. An example are these cliffs that happen, and there's some models where this has been taken away. So example is here in Florida, they eliminated what's called asset limits for food stamps. So if you get food stamps, you can save in an account, and they won't take your food stamps away. Now, they don't have this policy for TANF, right? So, which is cash assistance, public assistance, welfare. So if you save over, I think it's $2,000 here in Florida, they will take your cash assistance away. So what does that say to a family? If we're telling a family, well, you need to put money away for a rainy day, when that emergency comes, when that car breaks down, or when this happens, we're telling the family that, and they being told on the other end, well, if you save too much, we're going to take your cash assistance away. Those two things are in conflict. So I absolutely agree with Mark on that point, that we need to be smarter about how we think about how we transition people off of these programs.
Thank you. I want to dive a little bit deeper into the wage issue. We found that in order to pay for a 2-bedroom market value apartment here in Broward County, it would take the equivalent of 3 full-time minimum wage jobs for a 2-bedroom apartment. And so what are your thoughts about, increasing the minimum wage, addressing that scenario where folks are working but not with wages that allow them to get minimum housing for their families? Mark, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure, I'd be happy to. So obviously, this issue of government setting some kind of a wage, I hear a lot about $10 an hour or $15 an hour, and you hear a lot of conversation about it, but here's the truth. The truth is it's not enough, right? So $15 an hour is not enough. In Florida, we have 500,000 open jobs today. We have about 500,000 people looking for a job, about 250,000 jobs that are basically looking for people. And we have jobs all over Florida that pay in excess of $50,000, $60,000 that are open right now. And we don't have enough trained workers to fill these positions that we have right now. So it's like years ago I told the Wall Street Journal, why would President Obama only want someone to make $10 an hour? This doesn't make any sense. we should provide bridges, not cliffs, to the word earlier. We should provide training, again, for people who are willing to work and want to work. We should take every disincentive off the table. So, if you want to work for $12 an hour, you shouldn't lose your benefits. You should be encouraged to work. And you know what? If we need to provide assistance to you while you're getting training so you can get to $14 an hour, and so you can get to $17 an hour, why isn't it good public policy for us to provide that bridge to you? Why would we take it away? So here's the problem. If you think it sounds good to require everyone to offer $15 an hour minimum wage, the reality of it is there will be fewer of those entry-level training wage jobs available. We know that. It's simple algebra. And so we believe the very best way to get the most people, the most opportunity, and the most training for upward mobility is to create government policy where it advantages everyone to work and to get trained, and to not lose their benefits as they make their way up the system. So an artificially high mandated wage, it might create a lot of union memberships, but it certainly doesn't create any jobs.
Thank you. Jeremy?
Well, actually, I don't think a lot of the minimum wage jobs will be union jobs. I don't think people at, working at Applebee's are unionized, but that's neither here nor there. I won't get into unions. I'm not a union expert. But, I think the bottom line is people need more money. They need more money on a weekly, monthly basis. Now, there's multiple ways that people in poverty get money. They work. Most people in poverty are working. And then they get subsidy. So the question becomes, where do we want it to come from? I agree with Mark that, no, we shouldn't have a ceiling on the amount of money people can make. Although I think it, from my perspective, and I know he disagrees, a floor, you can have both at the same time. You can not have a ceiling, but have a floor. The other way is through subsidy. The Earned Income Tax Credit is a very popular program, probably the most effective anti-poverty program we have. Basically, and those who are familiar, I know Hispanic Unity is in the house. They run a Vita site. At the end of the year at tax season, they come in, they get their taxes done for free, and they get about, many of them, a quarter of their income in one lump sum at the end of the year. And that has a huge catalytic effect for those families. It helps them pay down debt that they've accumulated over the year. It helps them put a little money away for the future. It also helps them do things that help the economy here. Buy their kids school clothes, buy groceries, buy new furniture for their home. Like, those are the things that they do with that money, and it's important. So I'd say the bottom line is the goal has to be, I think we can agree on the goal, that people need more money. But there's only two ways that comes from. It's either through their wages or through some sort of subsidy. And it has to come from somewhere.
Thank you. Maria?
Definitely. I think that the government has the responsibility to create more housing programs, programs similar to Section A, where you have somebody working, but the rent amount the person is going to pay is based on their income. So you ensure that that person every year still is investing in the housing, but it's not investing 50% of their income to maintain shelter, which is, I think, critical. And, Jeremy mentioned something about, there's two ways to get money, working or through subsidized. Well, there's a third way, and it's through crime and violence. And we know that in the communities that are highly populated with African Americans and Latinos, there's a high concentration of crime and violence. Why is that? There's a huge correlation between poverty. They need to somehow make a living. And what are we doing about that? Because we know, the numbers are there, but then is institutionalized in how we treat this community and what we bring to those communities.
Thank you. So we've wandered through some of the policy challenges, some of what poverty looks like, And what I'd like to spend the last few minutes with each of you is for you to share what you think are the best solutions to reduce poverty. So I'll start with you, Jeremy.
Yeah, and I'll answer your question, but one thing I did want to come back to and note is that one point that Mark made earlier that I think is important is that our country is growing in population. The populations that are growing are households of color. We recently did a research study that said that basically if we did nothing, African Americans would not reach parity with whites in wealth for 228 years. And Hispanic families would not reach parity, average wealth, for about 80 years. So if we don't do something to address that issue, if we don't do something, if our population is going to grow and it's going to be people that are financially insecure, I don't see how that's a good outcome for our country. And I agree with the point Mark made about we need to do something about this because the population is growing. Two solutions. I mentioned a couple. The earned income tax credit is a really good place to start. Again, one of the most effective anti-poverty programs. But one that I'd want to focus in on is savings, helping facilitate savings activity with families. And the bottom line is, it's not a question of behavior, right? Low-income families have been saving forever. Since they've, every immigrant group that came to this country was in poverty. Every group. Savings, there's a culture of savings. It's not an issue around culture. It's an issue around access and ability. Do people have access to accounts? A lot of people are saving. They're just not saving it in a bank account, right? They're not saving it in a financial institution where even it can grow a small amount of interest, right? It grows no interest underneath your mattress. It actually loses money underneath your mattress. And there's a lot of reasons why people save. They save for an emergency when something happens, and they save for their future. They save to buy a home. So one of the programs that we really should think about are what are called individual development accounts, IDAs. They're basically, it's an account. You go into an agency, you tell them, I have a goal. I want to buy a home. And they say, okay, well, let's help you do that. Let's put together a plan. You want to put a little money away, and we'll match that up to a certain amount so that you have that cost of entry into home ownership. You have that closing cost and down payment. And we'll do financial education with you so that you can be a better homeowner when you buy the home. And then have access to a lot of the programs where you can get low interest loans, things like that, fix your credit, all of those things. These programs, I believe, can be transformative. Problem is they're too small. They haven't reached scale. And my feeling about scale is, look, if you're only going to spend $20 million nationally, which is what the federal government puts into IDA programs, you're not going to reach everyone, and you're not going to have those types of outcomes. And this is a program where people are putting real skin in the game. So that's one solution, I think.
Thank you. Maria?
Well, I'll go back to education. I think we need to spend more dollars in public education, schools, and university. I think that we need to spend more dollars in early child care. It is critical to our future. Job creation is important. I agree with Mark. I think changes in the eligibility criteria for government programs is critical as well, so that we can sustain the working poor, the Alice community. Here in Broward County, 44% of the community is working and is not making, they cannot make the ends meet. Yeah.
Almost half.
So definitely. And when we look at public assistance program, looking at who needs those programs and prioritizing is critical as well.
Great, thank you. Mark, best solutions.
Yeah, sure, thanks. Just quickly, I think a couple things. First, I think, the first question was what's government's role? And I think one of the solutions is, remember, government are taxpayers. And so we ought to substitute that word. And then we also ought to say, what about individuals that can help? What about nonprofits? And what about faith organizations? And what about community groups like United Way? And then, of course, what about our 405 cities in Florida? There's an interesting project in Pensacola going on called Achieve Escambia, where for the first time ever, the sheriff, the superintendent of schools, and the faith leaders are going zip code by zip code and comparing data, everything from poverty rates to nutrition to third grade reading scores to high school graduation rates. And they are having a collective impact conversation. And it's going on all over Florida. And I think the first solution is, let's see if we can do all of this collectively as Floridians before we just admit or somehow think that only government or taxpayers can do it. I think just quickly also, short term, we haven't talked about it tonight, but there are some smart people in government and some really stupid systems. So, for example, lawsuit abuse. Look at all of the billboards in Broward County telling me to sue somebody. In Florida, it costs the average family of four $3,400 a year in lawsuit abuse taxes. Now, for the people that Jeremy and our team was talking about earlier, they can't afford $3,400 just to pay for somebody else's lawsuits. Or look at the pension problems we have in Florida. We're spending billions of dollars of taxpayer money to bail out broken pensions instead of providing housing assistance, health care, job training. And then finally, I would say longer term, I think aligning the bridges instead of cliffs is the number one thing we can do from a policy standpoint. But also, it was said earlier, third grade reading scores in Florida, 54% of Florida's third graders are reading at third grade or above, and in Broward, it's 55%. It needs to be 100% of all third graders in Florida, regardless of race or zip code or family background. 100% need to be reading at third grade level. And we'll break this cycle of poverty if we do those two things. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's give a round of applause for our esteemed panelists. So we are now ready to receive questions from the audience. We have a podium in the back. If you would just go ahead and ask your question at the podium, and then that way Mark and everyone up here can hear your question. So give us your name and your question. He's turning it on.
Hello. Answer. Good night, everyone.
Wait.
Hello.
That's it, Maria. You have nothing more to say.
Thank you. Good night, everyone.
Good
My
night.
name is Lelis, and I'm a student at Broward College on our campus. I have a couple questions, but I'll start with the first one. Miss Maria, you talk about education a lot throughout your presentation, and this question's to you. Do you believe that opening the door to the higher education would bring down the poverty rate?
I think so. And I think, my life is a testimonial of that. I was born and raised in a different country. I came here as an adult. For the last 20 years, I've been trying to learn English, still learning, but I'm here, and I graduated from one of the best schools in this country with honors in New York City, and I'm here. I also have a licensed clinical social worker, so I have done internship in amazing places in this country. And I'm here because of education, because I had the opportunity to go to an amazing school in New York City. So I think my life is a testimonial of what education can do in the community.
Thank you. Go ahead, Jeremy. Oh.
All right. Oh, we got another one. Good. Before I wreck this mic. So the point around education is absolutely important. I think but we end the conversation of, did the education happen? Where we need to be thinking early on, what is the return on that education for the student? And what we find too often is that return is very low. And there's a couple things that are impacting that. One, what is the institution that they get that education from? Now, we know that there are a lot of, and there's been a lot of talk about this, there are a lot of institutions out there that are not providing quality on the dollar for the education. And so if you come out of that, pay a lot of money, and get that degree, it means nothing. It has no value in the marketplace, and that's a huge problem. The other is student debt. If you accumulate a lot of student debt in an effort to get that education, meaning, and it's not just about tuition, it's about young people coming to college with not the skills to even be in college, and then they have to take remedial courses that they have to take loans out to pay for. They're building more student loans, so that return diminishes if you don't get it from a quality institution, you don't get it in a trade that is going to bring value, and if you come out the other end with more debt than you can handle. So education is important, but it can't end with did you get the degree or not.
Mark, do you want to make some comments about the education? The importance of education?
Could you repeat the question? I would have a hard time hearing the question.
Do you believe that opening the doors to the higher education would bring down the poverty rate?
He said, so do you believe that opening the doors to higher education would bring down the poverty rate?
Okay, got it. Yeah, well, now I understand Jeremy's answer. I actually think Jeremy has the right answer there. And I think from a student debt perspective, if you take all of the people in the United States that own a car, and you compare it to only one generation that has student debt, there's more student debt in America from one generation than all the car loans in the United States put together. So I think that education is vital, but I actually can't say it any better than Jeremy did, I'm sorry. Jerry's our chief economist, sorry.
Thank you very much. One more question from you,
one
and
more
then we'll
question.
go to others.
What can the government do to eliminate situational poverty and generational poverty?
So he's asking specifically, what can the government do to reduce situational and generational poverty?
Yeah, I can try going first there, if that's all right.
That'd be great. Go ahead.
Sure. So situational poverty, I don't think the government can do anything, nor do I think they should do anything. I think in a dynamic country like America, I think that we're going to go through innovation change and technological change and global competition. There will always be situations that I find myself in and you find yourself in. I actually think situational poverty is dealt with through safety nets and through an American policy that says we don't want you to lose everything and we want you to get back on your feet, and we're all going to make sure that happens. Generational poverty is a much bigger problem, and I think that we've asked that question tonight. What's the problem and what can be done about it? Our belief is actually that 50 years of government policy that's been very short-term thinking. How can we build bigger programs with more assistance, and then as soon as you get a job that pays $1 more, we're going to cut that assistance off? It makes absolutely no sense. And so realigning American policy toward training, job opportunities, and upward mobility, where you keep the benefits until you've worked your way through it, makes a whole lot more sense. So that's our 2 cents on situational and generational.
Thank you, Mark. Jeremy or Maria?
I think with generational, I go back to the great percentage of the poor in this country are African American or Latino. And back in 1959, out of every 4 black individuals, 3 were poor. That hasn't changed much. And it hasn't changed much because a lot of the poverty is in our neighborhoods. And we need to bring our services to those neighborhoods. And we need to ask the residents, how can we help you? How can we take you to the next level? What can we do for you so that your kids will have the opportunity that you don't have? Our system is not friendly. It's not friendly for those communities. If any of you had the opportunity to go to one of the public offices here, one of the Department of Children and Families officers, sometimes you don't even find the sign for the families to know where to go or what to do. So we need to create systems that are friendly, and we need to bring those systems to the neighborhoods. And that's how we're going to break the cycle. Because if you have grandma raising the grandchildren because her daughter is in substance abuse, grandma is going to be very afraid to go out and get help for her grandchildren because she doesn't know how that is going to end.
Good, thank you. Jeremy?
Yeah, I mean, so on situational poverty, I mean, I think you need to look no further than what's going on in Broward. Just hearing about the creation of the Children's Council here in Broward and the huge outputs that were, I mean, that was just public investment focused on a problem and addressing it. And I think that is what needs to be done. Greater investment is going to help us deal with the situational poverty issues. I just don't think I can come off of that point. Does it have to happen through a big government program? It could, but it could also go through a program like the Earned Income Tax Credit, which is as big as any other tax credit in the tax code. I mean, it's administered in the same way that every other benefit through the tax code is. On generational poverty, what I think we need to start thinking about doing is how are we helping people build wealth and assets that can then be transferred to their children. Some of this is through education. So for example, helping low-income families put a little money away to save for their kids' education. Now, will that pay the whole bill? Absolutely not. It's crazy. It doesn't even pay the whole bill for middle-class families. But what it does is it creates a concept of aspiration for the families and those kids, an idea that you're going to college because we're taking a tangible thing, the money we have, putting it in an account and saying that money over there is for college. So that's one way. Another way is, I mean, look, ownership, right? I know. Ownership's not for, home ownership's not for everyone. But home ownership, a home, is a tangible asset that accumulates and appreciates, and then when can be transferred on to the next generation to either contribute to their wealth or becomes a place for them to live. So I think ownership is something, whether it's a home, a business, is something that we really need to think about. How are we helping people become owners in the wealth that's in their community?
Thank you.
I just want to add something because I do disagree with something Jeremy said. You know, for some of our families, even if you teach them how to save, they don't have something to save. Because if they had $2 and $3, you know, the same way that I take my kids on the weekends to have ice cream, that mother, that father sometimes also want to do the same thing with their child. So if she has $2, there's nothing wrong with her to go and take her children to get ice cream because they do want to give their children the same thing we give our children. So for some of our families and the one that I have seen in our system, they don't have the $5 to save. So it doesn't matter how much financial education and training you do because they don't have what to save.
Oh, I agree with that. I mean, it has to come with more money,
With the money.
month to month. Yeah.
Okay, we
Right. We're on the same page.
Thank you both. Next question, please.
Hi, this is a quick one. I'm asking about Dr. Ben Carson, who came to Broward College as an author and retired neurosurgeon, who now serves as the Secretary of Housing. Do you think Dr. Carson is going to help or hinder housing assistance and those aspirations you think of?
So, Mark, the question is, do you think Dr. Ben Carson is going to help or hinder the aspirations that we've mentioned here this evening?
I personally think he's going to be a big help because look, most Americans are never going to get to know him, but they're going to get to know his story. I would have to rely on another panelist about what kind of policies he's going to implement, but I think Ben Carson is the perfect example of somebody whose life story is a story that ought to be told more and more. And I don't care what his politics are, but I think he's actually somebody who is very much part of our conversation tonight. And I think in many ways, maybe not a role model of a lot of people, but I think an inspiration when we're talking about a couple of generations in this country. You take somebody from Detroit who grew up the way he did. I can't speak to the policies that he and the administration are going to enact. I just can't speak to that. He doesn't call me every day and ask me, believe it or not. So I just don't know. I don't know.
Well, Mark, he doesn't call me every day either. But what else? So can he, I think, is the question. Because we don't know a lot about Dr. Carson's views on a lot of housing issues. So my answer would be, if he listens to the people that know, then I think he can be successful. There are many, many housing experts. But one area that concerns me, I'll say, where he has taken a position, is on fair housing. You know, the Fair Housing Act was passed in an effort to limit housing discrimination, eliminate housing discrimination, weed out some of the horrible practices that were subjugating people to poor neighborhoods. And the Obama administration took a step to what they call affirmative fair housing, to say that segregation is a form of is a violation of the Fair Housing Act, and that we have to enforce it. And he's made some statements that I find troubling, that I think if we don't move down the road that the Obama administration was in, we're going to see a lot more segregated neighborhoods. We're going to see a lot more bad products going into neighborhoods, and more households of color being preyed upon the way they were not just pre-Fair Housing Act, but what happened right before the Great Recession and the housing crash. So that's one area where I'd like to see Dr. Carson listen to some of the experts.
Thank you. Maria?
I think sometimes some individuals, when they are running for office, you know, they say whatever they think is going to get them elected. And I think for him that probably was the case. So I think now he's going to be hit with reality, and the reality of a system that has been dysfunctional for generations. And I don't think he's going to fix that in 4 years.
Thank you. Next question?
Which he found out in the elevator of a public housing residence here in Miami.
Right, which didn't work, yeah. Oh, we got a ding on that. Okay, yes, sir. Your question?
Okay. So this is a question for everybody. So, like how Mark touched up on earlier, when some people make like a certain amount of money, they don't qualify for benefits. Like me personally, I never qualify for reduced lunch, and I don't qualify for financial aid now. So do you think that there are some people who actually like to stay in poverty?
So the question is, do people like to stay in poverty because they are going to lose benefits?
Yes.
Yes.
Well, I don't think so. I do think that there's a stigma around poverty, and people don't want to say that they need something. Like I've seen at my agency, homeless coming in and asking for help, and when you ask them about their situation, they are ashamed of sharing. So it's not that they want to live in poverty. It's that there's a lot of stigma around it, and they are afraid and ashamed of sharing.
Thank you. Jeremy?
Look, thank you for that question, because I think it is often the unspoken question that's in a lot of rooms. What I'll say is, I don't believe anyone wants to be in poverty. Like, start from that point, right? I think all people want prosperity. They want to move forward. They want good for things for their kids. But what I think happens is, and Mark spoke to this, people are also rational actors. You know, if I know that $2 an hour increase in my income means that I lose all of my food stamp benefits and the money I use to pay for food for my kids, that's a rational action to say no to the $2 increase in wages. So the devil's in the details, but I don't believe that anyone wants to be in poverty or is holding on to their, public housing, other than the fact that it is how they're housed. But would you give them a choice? Absolutely, they would take a better opportunity in a better neighborhood with healthier housing, without lead paint and cockroaches and asbestos. Absolutely.
Thank you. Mark?
Yeah, I concur. I agree 100% with what was just said. I don't think anybody wants to be in poverty, and I also think that I don't think these individuals and families actually sit around and say, hey, I'm in poverty and I don't want to be. I think they're making $13 an hour and they want to better their position in life, and they realize if they go to $14.50 an hour, they lost the benefit. So they're actually making a decision that is better off. As Jeremy said, they're rational in the way they think. So I think we need to be, as policymakers, rational in the way we make policies to align the policy outcomes we want with better decision making, where, you know, someone would say, you know, to the gentleman asking the question, you know, obviously you would want to better your situation and have more opportunity and more training. I think all of our government policies should give you every advantage and encouragement in the world to do that. I don't think anybody wants to stay in poverty. Absolutely not.
Thank you.
All right. Any other questions? I don't see people swarming the podium. It looks like our evening has come to a close. I want to give another big round of applause for Maria and Jeremy and Mark. Thank you so much for joining us. And I'm turning over the mic.
Thank you. Let's hear it again for our moderator and panelists. I think we have a few gifts to say thank you to them. We hope you enjoyed the Village Square this evening. We will begin planning our future events this summer, so please be on the lookout for upcoming events beginning in the fall. If you enjoyed the dinner and believe in what we're trying to do, then we hope you consider becoming a member, spread the word in the community, and become advocates for this type of programming. Again, thank you for your support, and we look forward to seeing you in the fall for our next season of the Village Square.